Her skirts clung to stained wood as the saloon's laughter snarled around her. Her dress sagged, straw scratching at the hem. Beside her, little Clara's hand trembled in hers, eyes wide in the jeer-lit haze. Abel Marchmont, her fiancé, spat a curse and tossed a tarnished silver locket around her neck to the Comanche warrior waiting by the stable door. "Take her. She's ugly and useless," he crowed, voice echoing off whiskey bottles. In that glare of lanterns, shame and fear coiled in Margaret Camp's chest. Yet when the warrior stepped forward, stoic and unblinking, Margaret saw something else in his dark eyes, a quiet promise. Night wind whispered through the open door, carrying horses' hooves, and she realized that her shame might yet be the first step toward new life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. Margaret Camp stood on drifting sawdust as Clara tugged at her skirt. The child's freckles and copper curls marked innocence. Margaret's plain face and threadbare shawl courted contempt. She inhaled the rancid air, ale souring on whiskey, spit in the gutter. Abel Marchmont, her fiancé, held court at the bar, chest thrust forward like a rooster, voice dripping scorn. Margaret raised Clara's chin. "Steady, darling." Clara's green eyes shone with panic. "Mama?" She knelt, brushing a curl from Clara's forehead. "I've got you." But Margaret's own shake betrayed her. Marchmont slung the silver locket, gift and shackle, at her feet. "You outlived your welcome. You're as ugly as widow's weed. I need a new bride, someone worth my line. Her price is a horse and a handful of blankets. Take her." His sneer cut colder than winter's breeze. The Comanche warrior called Black Horse stood silent by the stable posts. His braids glowed black as raven wings. His skin was seated beneath sweat and shadow. Margaret followed Marchmont's gesture. Her breath caught as Black Horse stepped forward, horse's breath snorting steam. Clara whimpered. Margaret gathered her shawl around the child. Marchmont barked for blankets, coarse wool patched in crude thread. His ranch hand tossed him into Black Horse's arms. A sleek sorrel mare stamped in the mud. "Take her away," Marchmont spat. "Let her freeze in the sage hills or ride Tantrum back to me." Black Horse inclining his head, voice low and measured. "She is under my protection." His English was spare, each word heavy as river stones. A hush fell. Smoke coiled from kerosene lamps, drifted toward rafters. Margaret's heart thundered, fear and something fierce rising in her chest. She expected cruelty, rough words, a swift lash, abandonment in night's maw. Instead, Black Horse offered a bundle of fresh camel hair blankets. He knelt before Clara, voice soft. "Child is cold." He rapped her knees. Clara's sobs hushed to a single shiver. Marchmont spat. "Don't coddle her. Savage. Ride now." He strode out, boots clinking on wood. Some patrons leered as he passed. Others whispered his name like varnish. Margaret stood, cloak falling open. Black Horse rose, extending a gloved hand. Margaret stared. His fingers were callous, but steady, free of mockery. She pressed Clara into his reach. He lifted the girl, placing her on her own feet. Clara clutched his wrist. Margaret gasped. Clara's childlike trust offered without hesitation. "Come," Black Horse said, voice gentle. "I will bring you both to shelter." Margaret's breath trembled. I have no pack." His dark gaze swept hers. "You may keep this." He drew a moccasin from Clara's blankets and handed it to Margaret. Woven in red and blue beads, it bore an elk's head pattern, for journey's sake. She accepted it, fingers brushing beads. In that touch, shame cracked open. No one had offered kindness since the jeers began. Outside, horses neighed. Night wind spiraled dust across muddy ruts. Margaret gathered Clara's hand. Black Horse lifted her satchel, a buckskin pouch with a few biscuits and a tin canteen. Water and pemmican last 3 days, he said. He turned to Margaret. You must ride. It is cold. He offered his saddle horn. Clara reached up, small voice firm. Goodbye, Abel. Black Horse's brow lifted. You speak English well. Clara frowned. He said I'd freeze. Margaret swallowed. We'll be safe. Black Horse's eyes softened. I will protect you. Margaret swung into the saddle bow. Clara curled against her chest. Blanket wrapped tight. Black Horse mounted, pacing the mare forward. Margaret's heart thrummed with panic. Hoofs clopping in time with her pulse. She looked back. The saloon's door stood open, Marchmont silhouette framed by lamp glow. He spat into the street, twitching as if by his words alone. He could call her back. Moonlight draped the drag of sagebrush and gravel. The air turned sharp. Margaret drew the silk shawl tighter. Clara murmured, voice half asleep. Mama, is he kind? Margaret inhaled cedar and wind. He's respectful. Uncertainty roiled. But she trusted the steady thrum of Black Horse's horse. They left Redstone's lights behind. Past crooked fence posts, the plain stretched white beneath Moon's cold eye. Margaret's mind raced. Her world had turned upside down in a flicker, trade, shame, flight. Yet here, under Star's Bridge, she felt a tremor of hope. They reached a low ridge where drifted snow half buried, an abandoned wagon. Black Horse reined in. Smoke curled from a distant fire pit. He dismounted, circling behind Margaret's mare, loosening a lariat. Margaret swung down, knees trembling. Clara nestled in his arms. The girl's small face was pale, but no longer wailing. Black Horse knelt by the fire, coaxing logs into flame with flint and steel. Sparks arced like fireflies. The warmth seeped into Margaret's frozen boots. He set a tin cup beside a simmering pot of stew. Eat, he offered. Margaret trembled, but warmed a biscuit in the heat. Clara pressed a spoon to her lips, feeding the girl as Margaret sipped water. Black Horse watched their meals, expression unreadable. Then he removed his headband, revealing hair streaked with premature gray. A mark of loss, Margaret thought. She dared a question. Your name? He paused over the stew. Cloud that walks. His voice was wind-soft. Margaret bowed her head. Margaret. He looked at the locket at her throat. The gift turned shackle. He paused, eyes dark. It weighs heavy. She touched the tarnished silver heart. It belonged to someone who lied. Cloud that walks nodded. You may leave it by the fire. His hand hovered over the locket, respectful as a prayer. Margaret hesitated, shame still raw. Then she unclasped it, setting it on a flat stone. Flames flickered around its twisted form. Clara reached for it. Mama? Margaret shook her head. Let it burn. Cloud that walked shielded Clara's eyes as Margaret tossed the locket into the hearth. Sparks swallowed silver as the metal curled and darkened. Clara's small gasp was hope and loss entwined. Margaret exhaled, fear and relief rising in her throat. My past is gone. Cloud that walks offered her a woolen shawl, soft, unadorned. Margaret draped it around her shoulders. He guided her to a roll of buffalo robes beneath a ledge. Warm for night. Clara crawled between robes, eyes heavy. Margaret stroked the child's hair, voice a whisper. We are safe. Cloud that walk sat, back to the starlit sky, rifle across his knees. Margaret studied his silhouette, broad shoulders sloping from years of hardship, head held straight despite loss. She felt her own shoulders slump, exhaustion and wonder coiling together. Clara's breathing evened. The child slipped into dreams. Margaret's thoughts drifted, abandoned by love, traded like cattle, yet sheltered by a warrior's quiet promise. She touched the shawl's fringe, the pattern echoing her journey, plain threads woven into strength. Here, at the edge of the frost-hushed plains, she felt possibility stir. Beyond the fire's glow, a distant howl rose. Wind or wolf, Margaret couldn't tell. She pressed closer to warmth, eyes on Cloud that walks his stoic form. He glanced at her, expression softening in the lantern haze. Margaret nodded, voice hushed. "Thank you." He inclined his head. "Rest." She closed her eyes, cradle of buffalo robes welcoming. Clara's small hand found hers. Margaret held tight, heart threading shame to trust. Above them, the night sky held promise, cold, vast, and endless, like the journey yet to come. As the fire's last embers folded into ash, Margaret Camp realized in this outlawed exchange she had traded shame for respect, horror for safety, and perhaps, at last, a fierce kind of love. Somewhere beyond the ridge, hoofbeats returned, deliberate, measured. Marchmont's bounty hunter had set out. Margaret's breath froze as she heard metal spurs clink through drifting snow. The night's hush cracked. Cloud that walks rose, rifle humming in his hand. Clara stirred. Margaret opened her eyes to moonlit steel. Fear and resolve entwined under the vast, indifferent sky. Hoofbeats clattered through the pre-dawn hush like a hammer on iron, each echo rippling across sagebrush flats. Margaret Camp's heart slammed against her ribs as Cloud that walked slid from behind a drifted butte, guiding her and Clara into the scrub's gray shelter. Clara pressed against Margaret's chest, blanket cocoon tight around her small shoulders. Beyond them, a lone rider, boots spurred, rifle slung, rode past their hidden mare without pause. The bounty hunter's silhouette glinted in the rising light. Cloud that walks waited until the man's horse hoofbeats receded into distant rock hollows. He exhaled, low as thunder. He searches for reward, not ruin. His English was soft, each word deliberate. Clara peeked between boughs, eyes wide. Cloud placed a finger to his lips, then nodded. Margaret drew in frost-laced air, trembling. She had imagined abandonment and worse. The saloon's jeers, Abel Marchmont's final sneer, but the hunter's passing filled her with dread all the same. They remounted. The frozen wind clawed at exposed skin. Margaret tucked Clara behind Cloud's broad back, sharing his furs. Each mile rode out their waning supplies. A crust of stale jerky, a half canteen of tepid water. Margaret's legs shook from cold and fear. Clara's soft breathing against her neck was a fragile drum of trust. Cloud steered toward distant cottonwood groves, pockets with smoke promising animals and fire. As the plains gave way to scattered trees, Margaret pressed her cheek to Cloud's shoulder. Her words caught on wind. She closed her eyes, memory flickering like candlelight. Abel Marchmont thrusting her before Redstone's crowd, his knife slashing her shawl, mocking her rat's nose and twisted mouth. He dragged Clara into the square, bidding her to dance for coin, then traded them away when shame sold cheap. At that thought, tears stung beneath her scarf. Cloud felt her shudder. He halted, lowering his horse's head. With a gloved hand, he offered her his buffalo wool shawl, a gift from his lost sister, he would later explain. Margaret's fingers brushed the soft fringe. In that touch, a shard of trust cracked through her guarded heart. She drew the shawl around Clara, then herself, warmth seeping where shame had lived too long. Clara stirred, eyes bright as river stones. She reached into her small satchel and withdrew a smooth pebble, white with quartz veins. "For you," she said, voice hushed. Cloud accepted it, cradling it gently in his palm. "Thank you, little one." He slipped the stone into his breast pouch, where it lay beside a tip of obsidian from his homeland. Margaret marveled at her daughter's grace. Even amid flight and fear, the child could give. They trotted into a stand of cottonwoods, the tangled trunks etched silver by dawn's frost. Here, a lone trading post squatted beside a creek's shallow bank. Weathered planks, shuttered windows, a wind-worn sign reading R. Caldwell, Supplies and Warmth. Margaret's breath caught. She lifted Clara from Cloud's back. The child's small boots sank into moss beneath the porch, bright as new hope. An elderly woman emerged, a widow named Sarah Caldwell, hand-stitched quilt draped across her arm. Her face was lined with seasons of drought and blessing, eyes kind as summer skies. "Lost travelers?" she asked, voice soft like worn leather. Cloud inclined his head. Margaret nodded, voice raw. We seek water and fire. Sarah ushered them inside. The cabin smelled of roast rabbit and pine pitch. She set a kettle to boil, then passed Cloud a tin cup of warm grain mash. First you two, she said to Margaret and Clara, ladling steaming broth into battered bowls. You look frozen to the bone. Margaret warmed her fingers by the hearth, child on her lap. Clara sipped and grinned, tiny eyes measuring the world anew. Outside, Cloud laid fresh buffalo hides on the floor, then unstrapped his pack. Sarah asked no questions of the Comanche warrior. Her respect was unspoken. She poured coffee into a pewter pot for Margaret. How long you out? She asked. Margaret stared into the dark brew, memory passing. 3 days. We fled from Redstone. She hesitated. My husband traded us. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Marchmont, he's got a price on you. Margaret's throat tightened. Sarah folded her quilt about Clara. Abel Marchmont wronged you both. He used your name to cover debts. Now, he pays hunters to drag you back. Property rights, he calls it. She set a mug before Margaret. Stay and rest, but be gone by nightfall. He'll hear rumors you're here. Cloud nodded, gathering the stitch kit from his satchel. He repaired Margaret's torn shawl, needle flashing, while Sarah busied herself fetching pemmican and hardened biscuits. Clara watched the warrior's calm hands. Fascinated. You stitch as well as ride? She asked. Cloud smiled, a slow dawn in his eyes. My mother taught me. Clara clapped, marveling at quiet strength. Margaret pressed a hand to her chest. Pride and gratitude entwined. Later, as wind rattled the cabin shutters, Sarah pressed a small sack into Margaret's hands. Salt pork and flour, she said, for your journey. And this. She withdrew a silver spoon, filigreed handle glinting. My daughters. May it feed you in kinder days. Margaret accepted it, tears pricking. In that gesture lay acceptance denied by many. Night fell thick as velvet. Clara slept on a wool pallet. Margaret nestled against Cloud that walks on buffalo hides. He shared sparse blankets, hum of his steady breath a lullaby. Margaret's mind wandered. Abel's sneer, her child's confusion, the bounty hunter's shadow. But under Cloud's vigil, warmth and trust wove together. Outside, hoofbeats returned, lighter this time, as if the hunter scouted the creek before moving on. Clara stirred, rubbing her eyes. Margaret brushed curls from her daughter's brow. All is well, she whispered, though her heart quivered. Cloud rose, rifle in hand, disappearing into night's hush. Margaret watched the door's dark seam, praying his watch would hold until dawn. Inside, Sarah Caldwell sat by the hearth, knitting by lamplight. She glanced at Margaret. No woman deserves to be traded like goods. Margaret met her gaze, voice trembling. I was proud once until he broke me. Sarah laid aside her knitting. You'll find pride again through love, not possession. Margaret drew the spoon Sarah had given her, tracing its filigree. Clara stirred again, small voice bright. Mama, he saved us. Margaret inhaled the scent of pine and cooking fat, feeling hope like first rain on dusty earth. Yet fear lingered, Abel's influence, the promised bounty, the harsh miles still ahead. Cloud returned, stepping into the lamplight. His face was taut with caution. He knelt beside Margaret, offering the obsidian-tipped knife he'd carved for her, a gift of protection. Margaret accepted it, its carved handle warm against her palm. May it guard you, he said. Clara reached for the knife's haft, eyes shining. Margaret placed a hand on Cloud's arm. Thank you. He inclined his head, voice a rumble. Dawn finds storms both near and far. Margaret closed her eyes, weary but resolute. Sarah whispered across the hearth. May you ride swiftly when you go. At the cabin's dark edge, hoofprints circled the creek's bank. Their promise. Abel's hunter will return at first light. Margaret laced her fingers around Cloud's. Clara fell asleep between them, shawl and quilt wrapped tight. Margaret's thoughts drifted. Shame traded for fear, but now hope tethered her heart. The hunter's threat still rode in shadows. Abel's betrayal weighed like iron. Yet here, in the hush of Sage Hill's night, she had warmth, a child's trust, and a warrior's vow. As the moon slipped behind clouds, a shape slipped past the cabin wall. Too swift for hoof or man, yet deliberate, a low whistle cut through night's murmur. Cloud that walked sprang to his feet, rifle raised as Margaret and Clara stirred. Beyond the window's cracked frame, a rider paused, face hidden beneath a slouched hat. The figure tipped forward, spurs clicking in silent promise. Neither friend nor foe, but another secret on the trail. Cloud that walks returned through drifting snow, rifle at rest, eyes narrow beneath braided hair. The rider's silhouette had slipped from Sarah Caldwell's cabin, hoofbeats lost in wind's roar. He halted at the trading post door and beckoned Margaret Camp and Clara to follow. Inside, Sarah stoked the fire until embers flared like watchful eyes. The hush that fell between them was thicker than frost-crusted pines. Margaret pressed a palm to her forehead. Ache and fever danced under her scalp. Clara wrapped the buffalo robes tighter around her mother's shoulders. Sarah regarded Margaret with concern. "You look ill as winter itself." She poured hot tea spiced with juniper berries into a pewter cup. Margaret accepted it, trembling. The steam curled upward, carrying warmth and promise. Clara's small fingers brushed her mother's cheek. "Drink, Mama," she murmured. Margaret sipped slowly, letting the warmth slide down her throat. Memories flickered. Abel Marchmont's laughter when she knelt in the Redstone Square. His boot heel pressed her back as he brandished a locket, mocking her rat's nose and crooked smile. He'd ordered her to dance for coin, then traded her like cattle when the show grew dull. Her scarred pride throbbed. She closed her eyes against the memory, drawing on Sarah's tea like a lifeline. Cloud emptied his canteen beside the hearth, then fetched a folded cloth from his pack. He knelt before Margaret, unfolding the soft square, a piece of deer hide his sister had sewn for him in summers long past. He dampened it in hot water and pressed it to Margaret's brow. "Rest," he murmured. His voice was low as snowfall. She opened her eyes to find compassion there, not scorn. Clara slipped to her knees and gathered kindling from a basket Sarah kept by the hearth. She arranged the twigs in a careful teepee, mimicking Cloud's fire building at their first camp. A spark from flint caught pine resin, and the flame blossomed. Clara beamed, eyes bright. "For you, Mama," she said. Margaret's lips trembled. The child's small act thawed shame's icy grip. Sarah Caldwell watched them, knitting needles clicking like distant rain. "Storm's heading east," she said, voice gentle. 3 miles up that ridge lies old Jonah's cabin. Stone foundation, timber walls. He'll lend shelter if you ask. Margaret nodded, leaning into Cloud's broad back. The warrior's gaze drifted to Clara, then to Sarah. He nodded in turn, voice clear. "At dawn we ride." Outside, wind rattled boards as they mounted. Margaret climbed into the saddlebow. Clara tucked against her side. Cloud lifted supplies into his saddlebag. Pemmican wrapped in tan hide, a half loaf of tough rye, and Sarah's spoon, now polished by Margaret's grateful fingers. Behind them, Caldwell's lantern glow faded into frosted dusk. They turned east, boots cracking sagebrush stems under moonlight. Cloud led through a shallow creek, ice-ribbed and half-frozen. Margaret dismounted, shivering, and stooped to fill her canteen. Cold seared her fingers. Clara's small hands brushed her back. She pressed a kiss to Clara's temple. "Almost there," she whispered, voice ragged. They crested the ridge, wind-blown and skeletal. Below, lights flickered at the edge of a pine grove. Old Jonah's cabin, half buried in snowdrifts. Smoke hovered above the stacked logs like a promise. Cloud guided them down a hidden trail, leaving hoof prints in virgin snow. Then he halted, gaze fixed on distant tracks. 3 sets, heavy-soled boots and horses' hooves converging on the cabin's light. The bounty hunter had beaten them here. Margaret's pulse jerked. She slid from the mare. Clara clung to her skirts. Cloud dismounted, hand on bowie knife. He beckoned them into the pines, where drifts rose shoulder-high. Moonlight sifted through boughs, dusting their coats. Clara tucked the spoon and shawl into her satchel. Margaret smoothed the buffalo robes, breath shallow. They reached the cabin's back porch and slipped inside as old Jonah pushed open the door. His face was weathered leather, eyes as gray as storm clouds. He spat a plug of tobacco. "Cloud that walks," he greeted, voice gravel-soft. "Your sister's shawl warms my hearth." He nodded at Margaret. "Bring her in." The cold steals color from bones. Jonah's hearth crackled. Deer hides lay atop the puncheon floor. Cloud laid Margaret on a bearskin cot. Clara settled beside her, spoon in hand. Jonah fetched a pot of thick stew, roots, venison, and salt pork. Margaret ate, spoon trembling. Clara fed her mother, bright-eyed. Jonah squatted, examining tracks leading from the door. Hunter's close. He whistles 3 times, signature of Marchmont's man. Cloud's eyes flicked to the frozen window. "We cannot tarry." Jonah spat. "Night's long. You'll freeze crossing the pass before dawn." He rose and unhooked the lantern. "Rest until first light. Then I guide you, wolf path past the cliff edge." Margaret closed her eyes, warmth pooling in her belly. She clung to Clara's sleeping form. Cloud knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your fever burns low," he said. His gaze bore concern, not pity. Margaret reached for his hand, voice hushed. "Thank you for giving rest when I feared none." He bowed his head. "Your courage gave me purpose." Outside, the flurry deepened. Jonah wedged a log in the door, then stamped earth on the porch. Cloud and Jonah exchanged a glance. Silent pact of protection. Clara stirred, dream smile bright as dawn star. Margaret closed her eyes and drifted into troubled sleep. In the darkness, her dreams churned. Abel Marchmont's sneer, Clara's tears, the locket's final flare. Then a gentle hand brushing her cheek. Cloud's voice echoing. "You are more than shame." She woke to the lantern's glow. Fever eased, but weakness clinging like cobwebs. She pressed a hand to her belly, memory of the shawl's fringe brushing her skin. Cloud whispered, "Time to move." Clara rubbed her eyes, bathed in firelight. Jonah bore a pack of supplies. "Beyond the cliff," he said, voice low. "You'll ride the buffalo trail, wider than Wolf Path, fed by Rock Spring." He paused. "But Marchmont's man still whistles." Margaret clenched the quilt's edge. Clara touched her cheek. "Mama?" Margaret inhaled winter air through her teeth. "We go, and we will be free." They stepped into the swirling snow. Jonah, leading with lantern held high. The wind ripped at their cloaks, howling beneath pine spires. Margaret stumbled once, fever-lashed, but Cloud caught her, steady as ancient stone. Clara hid behind his legs, peeking at the lantern's glow. They wound around the cabin's flank to a narrow cleft between rocks. Stone walls dripped ice. Steam hissed from hidden springs. Cloud whispered instructions. "Follow me. Keep low. Walk close." He pressed a finger to his lips. Jonah's lantern illuminated a passage sloping downward. Margaret followed, Clara clasping her hand. Cold seeped through boots, breath plumed like prayer. Behind them, hoofbeats thundered, distant but closing. The lights of old Jonah's cabin vanished above. Cold, wet walls pressed in. Clara's small voice quavered, "Mama, I'm scared." Margaret reached into her satchel and pulled out Sarah's spoon, pressing its filigree handle into Clara's palm. "Hold tight," she whispered. Clara nodded, eyes bright with quiet strength. They reached the cleft's mouth on the far side, a narrow gap opening onto rolling ridges. Moonlight pooled on a buffalo trail, hoof prints packed firm. Cloud and Jonah lifted the child onto Cloud's shoulders. Margaret slid into saddlebow. Jonah handed Cloud the lantern. Cloud mounted, leading the mare onto the trail. Margaret pressed Clara's satchel to her chest, cold air biting beneath her shawl. The trail curved east toward distant peaks where dawn would break. The wind shifted, carrying a faint whistle, 3 low notes drifting over sagebrush like a vow. Margaret's heart froze. She closed her eyes to steel her courage. Clara curled tighter, blanket frayed at the edges. Cloud's steady rhythm guided them into shadowed hills. And as the whistle fell silent behind them, Margaret realized that freedom lay not in flight alone, but in each breath she took beside those who chose to stand with her. Ahead, the trail forked beneath a jagged ridge, one path leading over a snow-locked pass, the other dipping into a black gulch. Cloud paused, lantern raised. Margaret's breath caught as she saw hoof prints, a fresh set, too deep for Jonah's lantern, too bold for a wild beast. Clara stirred on Cloud's back. Margaret's voice trembled. "Which way?" Cloud's gaze met hers, calm and unfaltering, but his grip on the reins tightened. The ridge loomed like a stone gate. Behind them, the hunter's whistle teased the wind once more. Cloud that walks paused at the fork, nostrils flaring to wind whisper. Margaret Camp's boots pressed cold sagebrush. Clara's breath plumed against her neck. Below, hoof prints trailed down 2 paths, one leading up toward wind-bare ridges, the other dipping into a narrow gulch dark with shadow and steam. Cloud turned. "This way," he murmured, voice wind-soft. Margaret slid from the mare, knees trembling. Fever's haze flickered behind her eyes, tight heat in her skull. She pressed a gloved hand to her brow, remembering Abel Marchmont locking her in the old garden shed. The door bolted, darkness pressing until she begged by candlelight. Now, beneath the hyphen of boughs, she felt that same weight, fear of abandonment, shame of her body and name. Clara climbed down, boots sinking behind her mother. She stooped to mark the chosen trail on a fallen pine twig, carving a single notch. "For the way back, Mama," she said, small voice steady as stone. Margaret brushed Clara's copper braid, heart unspooling. The child's courage stitched hope through her bones. Cloud led them into the gulch, walls curling close. Steam seeped from fissures in granite, frosting every branch. Each breath tasted of sage and mineral. Margaret's fever flared as they walked. She swayed, vision dimming to swirling gray. Cloud sensed her stumble. His arms slid beneath her shoulders. "Steady," he whispered, guiding her past ice shards and hollows. Above, a single note, low and mournful, cut through steam. Then 2, and 3 sharp whistles, echoing like a hunter's vow. Margaret's pulse surged. "He's here," she gasped. Clara pressed against Cloud's back, fumbling for the spoon Sarah gave her. She offered it to her mother. "For strength," the child said. Margaret swallowed, hands shaking. They rounded a bend to find a battered miner's shack half buried in drifts. Boards sagged. Window panes rattled in wind. Yet smoke drifted from the chimney, a sign of life in this frozen seam. Cloud dismounted and peered inside. "Jonah warned me of this place," he said. "A trapper's refuge." Clara scampered beside him, peering through frosted glass. Margaret stumbled forward, knees aching. Inside, a hearth glowed beneath stacked logs. A man emerged from shadows, silver whiskers, suspenders frayed, a Winchester slung at his side. His name was Ike Dutton, a trapper turned recluse. His eyes narrowed at Cloud, then softened at Clara's curl of red hair. "Lost sheep?" he grunted, voice rough as gravel. Clara nodded, breathing warm against glass. Margaret gave a dull nod, pressing her shawl close. "We flee Marchmont's men," Cloud said. "We seek shelter." Ike spat tobacco onto the floor. "Marchmont's hand? Jim Malone? Paid in greenbacks." He closed the door on Wind's howl. "You've hours, then he'll burn this hill for you." Ike set bread and jerky on a rough plank table. "Eat." He handed Margaret a tin cup of boiled water. The steam eased her fever's knife edge. Clara fetched kindling from a corner and built a small fire in a rusted stove. Sparks curled up the chimney like caged birds. Margaret sank onto a plank bench, forehead burning. Ike frowned. That fever will steal you to your grave if you don't rest. He fetched a folded cloth from his pack and dampened it in hot water. Cloud knelt beside Margaret, pressing the rag to her brow with careful strength. "Drink this," he said, cupping water in his palm. Margaret drank, savoring each drop as though it were life itself. Outside, Malone's whistle drifted again, 3 notes sharp as icicle. Ike's jaw hardened. "He's on the ridge, scouting the gulch. We've little time." Cloud rose, shouldering his rifle. "We ride at first light." Ike nodded, reaching for a folded map. "Wolf path from the creek. Narrow, but Malone won't chase in dark. I'll show you." Clara perched on a pile of hides, eyes bright. She held out the filigree spoon Sarah gave her. For luck. Ike accepted it, turning it over in calloused hands. "Good talisman." He tucked it into his coat. Margaret saw in his eyes a flicker of warmth, an echo of Sarah's kindness. Night deepened. Ike lent Margaret his flannel bedroll. Clara nestled beside her. Cloud sat at the stove, polishing the obsidian-tipped knife the child gifted him. He placed it by Margaret's side before lying on buffalo hides across the floor. Margaret drew the shawl tighter, Chinwick's tool, her sister's gift, tucked beneath her hand. She drifted into fevered dreams. Abel's laughter when he ripped the locket from her throat. Clara's cry as Marchmont shoved her from the wagon. The saloon's jeers swirling like vultures. She awoke with a start to Cloud's quiet voice. "Breathe." He offered water. Margaret's pulse hammered. She drank, letting his presence anchor her to the present. Clara pressed a cold cloth to her mother's brow. "Better," she whispered. Margaret smiled, tears pricking. "Thank you." The child's small hand remained on her cheek, gentle promise of tomorrow. Outside, wind rattled boards. A furtive shadow passed the window. Malone's whistle shrilled 3 notes, then silence. Ike drew a knife. "He's setting a trap. Horses tied to that old juniper. He wants to strand you." Cloud rose, gloved hand resting on Margaret's. "We leave now." Her legs trembled, but she nodded, drawing Clara close. Ike scooped up a few biscuits and jerky, then hoisted his rifle. At the door, Malone's whistle came again, faint and mocking. The 3 slipped into night, following Ike through a thin notch in granite. The trail twisted past icy pools, each step a gamble. Margaret faltered. Cloud's arm steadied her. Clara clutched the shawl's fringe, eyes bright in lantern glow. They paused at a shallow creek, ice-forming rivulets on mossy stones. The horses whinnied, low and anxious. Malone's rifle cracked once. No shot, but a warning. Cloud scanned bows, voice low. "He watches." Ike motioned them onward. Wolf path, tight and hidden. "Follow me." They crossed the creek, boots splashing chill. Margaret's heart hammered. Clara's small footsteps echoed. They left hoofprints behind, riding east into the gulch's narrowing mouth. Wind slashed at their faces, carrying Malone's distant whistle like a curse. Margaret pressed herself against Cloud's back, shawl pinned. Clara curled into her arms, murmuring a lullaby Cloud once sang beneath desert stars. They left the cabin's glow behind. A ridge loomed ahead, solution or snare. The gulch's walls closed in black ice glinting. The wind bore another whistle. Closer this time, each note a promise of chase and capture. And in the gulch's shadow, Margaret Camp realized that freedom lay not in distant ridges, but in the strength she found in those who chose to stand with her. Each step a vow against Marchmont's cruelty. Each breath a pledge of quiet love. As they neared the trail's end, a burst of snow and rock thundered from above, an avalanche's first rumble cascading toward them. Cloud's warning shout cut through wind's howl. Margaret seized Clara, heart caught between fear and resolve. Above, the gulch's shadow shifted, and the path ahead vanished beneath choking snow. Snow shattered the air in a thunder of ice. Cloud that walks threw himself atop Margaret Camp as the avalanche tore through the gulch's mouth, burying horses and hapless riders in a freezing roar. He clutched Clara to his chest, hearing her small cry above the crash. Then silence, white and humming, settled around them like a tomb. Margaret's head lolled. Fever ache and fear tangled in her veins. Cloud swept away Snow with broad arms until his fingers grazed Margaret's coat. He brushed aside drifts until Clara's shawl peeked through. Then he turned Ike Dutton's form, half buried in frozen robes. "Jonah!" Margaret gasped, voice a low ember. "Ike!" Ike coughed, snow tumbling from his whiskers. He nodded through chill haze. "All here," he rasped. Cloud counted. 3 heartbeats, 3 ragged breaths. Margaret's fever burned down in sub-zero dusk, but her eyes fluttered. She saw Cloud's dark silhouette against swirling drift and found Clara's green gaze. Cloud shook the last of the snow from his buffalo robe and draped it around Margaret's shoulders. "We move," he murmured, hooves muffled in snow. Ike rose, hauling a pickaxe pack from beneath a boulder. Trails blocked. "We go over the ridge." Margaret slung the spoon Sarah gave her onto her belt and took Clara in one arm. Cloud lifted her to the saddlebow. Clara tucked the carved horse into her tiny fist. The child's gift glimmered in the lantern glow as Cloud swung Margaret into the stirrup. Ike led the mare. They climbed through knee-deep drifts, wind ablaze against their faces. Margaret's limbs shook. Each step pressed cold marrow into flesh. Fever's final tremor passed, leaving her hollow and raw. She clung to the stirrup horn, Sarah's spoon tapping against her thigh like a heartbeat. Above, the ridge's crest yawned under starless sky. At the summit, moonlight spilled across snowy ridges. Malone's whistle sliced through the wind. 3 hollow notes carried from the gulch below. Cloud paused, head tilted. "He waits," he said. Ike's lantern bobbed. "He's sworn to fetch your reward. Marchmont promised gold." Margaret swallowed shame and fear. "Then let him see," she whispered. Cloud turned his mare downhill, guiding them along a narrow buffalo trail curving around the ridge. Malone's figure emerged from drifting haze, rifle leveled, boots braced. He spurred his mount forward. Cloud reined in. Margaret slid from the bow, Clara in her arms. Malone halted 50 paces away, rifle pointed. His breath steamed. Spurs glinted. "Marchmont's gold," he snarled. "Bring her back, alive." Margaret squared her shoulders. Fever drained her limbs, but defiance flickered in her eyes. She held Clara out, voice steady. "You'll get no ransom." Malone's jaw clenched. "Your claim's worth more than life." He took a step forward. Cloud lay a hand on Malone's rifle barrel, pressing down until the barrel dipped. Malone's eyes widened as it flitted from the muzzle. Cloud spoke. "Your loyalty to Marchmont ends here." His voice was low thunder. Malone's grip faltered. Clara pressed the carved horse to Malone's palm. She reached out, offering the toy. Malone blinked, face unreadable. Margaret stepped forward, pressing the spoon into Malone's free hand. "These are gifts, not shackles." Malone stared at the spoon's filigree, at Clara's hopeful gaze, then at the shining horse. His rifle lowered, barrel pointing at snow. He spat. "He said you were cursed ugly." His voice cracked. Margaret met his gaze, eyes steady. He lied. "My worth is not his to decide." Behind Malone, Ike Dutton emerged with rifle raised. Malone's lip curled. "I owe Abel." He flinched as Cloud's voice cut across the ridge. "He is dead to us all." Margaret's breath stalled. Cloud met Malone's eyes. "I spoke to Marchmont's steward at the trading post. The rewards rescinded, paper proved." He drew a folded notice from his sash, a stamped proclamation revoking Marchmont's bounty. Malone stared at the paper, wavering. Clara tugged at Malone's sleeve. "Free," she whispered. Malone brushed snow from proclamation, reading its bold ink. His shoulders slumped. It's true. He looked at Margaret, at Clara's small face alight by moon. Then he dismounted, offering her the rifle's butt. She's yours. Margaret accepted it, trembling, then handed it back. No, we trust peace. Malone swallowed, closing his eyes. Your child, your honor. His voice broke. He saluted with his hat, turned, and spurred away into the night. The ridge swallowed his hoofbeats. Cloud lowered his reins. He rides away, he said softly. Margaret exhaled, relief washing through her. Clara nestled at Margaret's chest, pressing the carved horse and spoon into the quilt folds. Cloud and Ike helped Margaret back into Saddlebow. The mare resumed the buffalo trail toward the settlement beyond the ridge, a cluster of cabins known as Frost Creek. Icicles caught lantern light as they descended. Fever's last grip released Margaret's bones. Warmth returned in wavelengths. They arrived at Frost Creek's edge as dawn bled silver across pines. Deputy Buckley, ledger in hand, waited on the porch of the sheriff's cabin. Heard a hunter's whistle, Buckley said, voice gruff kindness. Rewards off the books. Marchmont's claim void. He stamped the ledger. Property free. Margaret dismounted, Clara in her arms. She faced the deputy, chest heaving. Thank you. Buckley tipped his hat. Be safe. Cloud led her to a cabin with smoke curling above roof timbers. Inside, a hearth glowed. Blankets and pemmican awaited. Ike unrolled the buffalo hides by the fire. Buckley lingered at the door, then nodded and left. Margaret sank onto a bench, Clara beside her. Cloud knelt, placing the obsidian-tipped knife and Sarah's spoon on the table between them. Symbols of protection and sustenance. He withdrew the buffalo wool shawl, offering it to Margaret. For you, he said, voice like wind through pines. Margaret drew the soft wool around her shoulders, eyes brimming. She touched Cloud's cheek, gentle as a prayer. I am worthy, she whispered. Cloud's gaze softened. You always were. Clara pressed the carved horse into Cloud's hand. He traced its grain with a callous finger. For hope, he murmured. Clara beamed. Outside, frost cracked in the early sun. Pine smoke curled to her awakening sky. Margaret rose and carried Clara to the hearth. She fed her daughter a spoonful of stew from the pewter bowl, watching the child's bright eyes. Then she turned to Cloud and Ike. Ike reached into his pack and drew out a folded letter, Marchmont's own words, rescinding his bounty and confessing his cruelty. He handed it to Margaret. She read in silence. Your defiance shames all I was taught. She folded the letter, placing it beside Sarah's spoon. Margaret stepped back, voice strong. He tried to own me, but I choose my own life. Cloud stepped beside her, hand brushing hers. Together, they faced the hearth's glow. Clara sat between them on a buffalo hide, wrapped in Sherpa blanket. Cloud knelt behind Margaret, drawing her close. She rested her head against his breastplate shirt, heart thrumming in new certainty. The door creaked as Deputy Buckley returned with a homesteader, Mrs. Emmett, bearing fresh bread. Welcome home, Emmett said. This cabin's yours now, Abel's debts paid. Margaret's chest tightened with gratitude. She accepted bread and nodded. Outside, the wind whispered through pines as the trio passed into the cabin's warmth. A new family bound by choice, not chains. Under Frost Creek's dawn, Margaret Camp stood tall, fever gone, shame melted away. She looked at Cloud that walks, stoic guardian and gentle warrior, and saw the reflection of her own worth. Clara's laughter rose above crackling logs, free and bright. Margaret touched the shawl at her throat, the spoon on the table, the carved horse in Clara's small hand, symbols of survival and love. She exhaled, voice hushed as prayer. Our promise. The snow-dusted world beyond held no more chains, only wide plains and futures built by hand and heart. And though Abel Marchmont's shadow had loomed, it dissolved in sunrise's glow. Together, Margaret, Clara, and Cloud that walked stepped into day's promise. Family forged in storm and snow, bound by respect and free at last.